The rust-eaten corridors of Zira Station groaned under the weight of decades of neglect. Morgan Meyer navigated through the dimly lit passageways, his boots echoing against metal floors, worn thin by countless footsteps. The air hung heavy with the stench of industrial lubricants and unwashed bodies, the unmistakable perfume of a frontier outpost long past its prime. He pulled his collar higher, a futile attempt to filter the noxious atmosphere. Today was a last-chance exchange day, when Zira's administration auctioned off everything and everyone deemed unprofitable or unwanted. Morgan usually avoided these events, finding them distasteful reminders of how far humanity had fallen since the Great Purge Wars. But his research into lost cultures required occasional forays into such unsavory markets. The makeshift auction hall had once been a cargo bay. Now, it served as the station's commercial center, repurposed with haphazard seating and a crude stage. Morgan slipped into the back row, cataloging the crowd through scholars' eyes. Traders from a dozen systems, mercenaries between contracts, station dwellers looking for bargains, all the usual suspects for a frontier auction. "Lot 37, called the auctioneer, a portly man with augmented vocal cords that carried his voice without need for amplification. "Salvage equipment from the Vega Quadrant. Opening bid at 200 credits. Morgan scanned the catalog on his portable screen, noting items of potential interest. His mobile laboratory ship, lovingly called the Old Ox by those who'd seen its ungainly bulk, contained storage for artifacts that might illuminate humanity's fractured past. As an exiled scholar from the Central Academies, he'd spent 15 years collecting fragments of lost cultures, piecing together the tapestry of human heritage that the corporate confederacy tried so hard to erase. The auction proceeded tediously. Morgan bid on and won a collection of data crystals reportedly salvaged from a pre-purge settlement and a ceremonial knife of unknown origin. Nothing exceptional, but potentially valuable for his research. Then came Lot 49. "Living cargo," the auctioneer announced, his tone unchanged from when he'd been selling machinery parts. "Humanoid female, unknown origin, approximately 20 standard years. No identification, no chip. Found in drift space near the Cygnus Expanse." Morgan's attention sharpened. He'd been about to leave, satisfied with his modest acquisitions, but something in the auctioneer's description caught his interest. The Cygnus Expanse had once been solar territory before the purges. Two handlers dragged a cage onto the stage. Inside, a female figure crouched, chains binding her wrists and ankles. Her skin bore an ashen, grayish-blue tint that immediately marked her as non-standard human. Thin to the point of emaciation, her body was covered in bruises and what appeared to be ritual scarification. Her head hung low, matted hair obscuring her face. Morgan felt his stomach turn. Slave trading was technically illegal in Confederate space, but on frontier stations like Zira, the law existed as mere suggestion. Indentured servitude and salvage of living cargo provided convenient euphemisms for the practice. "Opening bid at 500 credits, the auctioneer called. "She's damaged goods, as you can see, but functional. Might clean up nice with some care. No visible augments, all organic." Silence greeted his call. Not even the usual predatory traders seemed interested. Morgan watched as flies, the station's ubiquitous pests, landed on the girl's exposed skin. She didn't even twitch to brush them away. 400? 300? The auctioneer's voice took on an edge of irritation. "Come on, people. She's at least worth processing for organ markets." The girl's head lifted slightly, and through the curtain of dirty hair, Morgan caught a glimpse of her eyes, dark, deep, and utterly present despite her physical condition. There was awareness there, intelligence, and something else that made Morgan's scholarly instincts prickle. "Last call for Lot 49. Going to waste disposal if there are no takers." Morgan wasn't sure what compelled him to stand. Perhaps it was the academic in him, sensitive to the potential loss of knowledge. Perhaps it was simple human decency, a quality he'd managed to preserve despite years in the cold vacuum of space. 300, he called, his voice steady. The auctioneer's eyebrows rose. We have 300 from the gentleman in the back. Any advance on 300? No one spoke. No one even looked interested enough to counterbid. Sold for 300 credits to Collector Meyer. Payment and processing at the exit station. Morgan approached the stage after completing the transaction, ignoring the curious glances from other attendees. Up close, the girl's condition was even worse than he'd initially assessed. What he had thought were random scars on her shoulders now revealed themselves as glyphs, ritualistic markings he recognized from his research into solar culture, a civilization purged from official history nearly a century ago. "Do you want sedation for transport?" asked one of the handlers, a burly man with cybernetic arms. "No extra charge. Makes them easier to move." "That won't be necessary," Morgan replied, keeping his voice neutral. "I prefer my acquisitions conscious for initial assessment." The handler shrugged and unlocked the cage, roughly pulling the girl out by her chains. She stumbled, nearly falling, but caught herself. Despite her weakness, there was a fluid grace to her movements that spoke of a body once strong and capable. "All yours, Collector. No refunds, no returns." Morgan nodded curtly and gestured for the girl to follow him. She did so without resistance, her chains clinking softly as they navigated the station's corridors toward the docking bays. He didn't speak until they were safely aboard the old Ox, the airlock sealed behind them. "I'm going to remove those restraints now," he said, his voice deliberately gentle. "I mean you no harm." She regarded him with those fathomless eyes, neither agreeing nor disagreeing. Morgan took a small laser cutter from his pocket and carefully sliced through the metal cuffs. They fell away, revealing raw, infected skin beneath. "My name is Morgan Meyer. I'm a cultural anthropologist, a scholar of lost civilizations. This ship is my home and mobile laboratory. You're safe here." Still, she didn't speak, but her gaze tracked Morgan's movements with acute awareness. "You need medical attention," he continued, gesturing toward the ship's small infirmary. "Will you allow me to help you?" For a long moment, she remained motionless. Then, with deliberate slowness, she nodded once. Morgan's medical skills were rudimentary, but sufficient for frontier living. He guided her to the examination table and ran a diagnostic scanner over her body. The results made him wince. Severe malnutrition, multiple infections, partially healed fractures, and evidence of systematic abuse. Someone had tried very hard to break this woman, body and spirit. "I'm going to administer antibiotics and nutrients," he explained, preparing an injection. "This will help fight infection and begin addressing the malnutrition. It might sting a bit." She didn't flinch when the needle entered her arm, her eyes remaining fixed on Morgan's face, as if trying to decode some puzzle written there. "You bear solar markings," he said as he worked, cleaning her wounds with antiseptic. "The glyphs on your shoulders, they're from a civilization supposedly eradicated during the Purge Wars. Are you solar?" At the word solar, something flickered behind her eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or pain. Her cracked lips parted slightly, but no sound emerged. "It's all right," Morgan assured her. "You don't have to speak until you're ready. Rest now. We'll talk when you're stronger." He helped her to a small sleeping compartment adjacent to the infirmary, where she could be monitored by the ship's medical systems. Within minutes of lying down, she was asleep, her breathing shallow but steady. Morgan retreated to the ship's bridge and initiated undocking procedures. Zira Station wasn't a place to linger after acquiring something, or someone, valuable. The old Ox's engines rumbled to life, the familiar vibration resonating through the hull as they pulled away from the station. "Avis," he addressed the ship's rudimentary AI system. Set course for the Sarvan system. Stealth protocols. Course set. The system responded in its flat, gender-neutral voice. Estimated arrival, 43 hours at standard velocity. Morgan leaned back in the pilot's chair, rubbing his temples. What had he gotten himself into? He'd come to Zyra seeking artifacts, not a living, breathing member of a supposedly extinct culture. If she truly was solar, the implications were enormous. The Solars had been spacefaring pioneers with technologies and philosophies centuries ahead of their time, until the Confederacy decided their independence posed too great a threat. For the next 12 hours, Morgan divided his time between the bridge and checking on his passenger. Her condition stabilized under the influence of the medical treatments. And color, what passed for normal color in her unusual physiology, began returning to her face. It was during the ship's artificial night cycle that Morgan heard it, a soft, melodious sound coming from the infirmary. He found her sitting upright on the bed, eyes closed, lips moving in what appeared to be chant or prayer. The words were unlike any language Morgan had encountered, flowing like water, each syllable seeming to hang in the air longer than physically possible. "Solar," she whispered when she noticed him standing in the doorway. Her voice was rough from disuse, but carried a resonant quality that made the single word seem to vibrate through the ship's hull. "I am Solar." Morgan felt a scholar's thrill run through him. "You understand my language?" "I understand many things," she replied haltingly. "They tried to make me forget. Could not." "What's your name?" Morgan asked, approaching slowly. She was silent for a long moment, as if struggling to remember. "Ceridian," she finally said. "I am Ceridian of House Luminera, keeper of the seventh voice." Her hand unconsciously moved to touch the glyphs on her shoulder. "Ceridian," Morgan repeated, committing the name to memory. "How did you come to be on that station? The solar civilization was reportedly destroyed decades ago." Pain flickered across her features. "Not destroyed, scattered, hunted. I was taken from our sanctuary world, sold, many times." Her fingers traced the patterns of old injuries. "They wanted solar secrets, tried to extract them." Morgan's jaw tightened in anger at what she'd endured. "I'm sorry for what was done to you. No one will hurt you here." Ceridian studied him with that penetrating gaze. "Why did you buy me, Scholar Morgan?" It was a fair question, one Morgan had been asking himself. "I study lost cultures, try to preserve what knowledge remains of them. When I saw the solar markings on your skin, I couldn't let them dispose of you." He hesitated. "But you're not an artifact or specimen. You're a person. I don't own you. Once you're well, you can choose your own path." Something almost like a smile touched her lips. Freedom. A strange concept after so long. Her expression darkened suddenly. "We cannot stay in open space. They will come." "They who?" The ship's alarm interrupted him, a shrill wail that indicated proximity warnings. "Avis, report!" Morgan commanded, rushing to the bridge. Unidentified vessel approaching on intercept course. Configuration matches known profiles of Blackreach slavers. Morgan cursed under his breath. Blackreach operated in the shadow spaces between Confederate jurisdictions, specializing in the acquisition and sale of exotic merchandise. If they'd tracked the old ox from Zyra Station. Ceridian appeared in the bridge doorway, steadying herself against the frame. "They have followed the resonance," she said, her voice stronger than before. "Solar energy leaves traces those with the right technology can track." "How do we lose them?" Morgan asked, dropping all pretense that he was the only expert in the room. "Atmosphere," she replied without hesitation. "Planetary magnetic fields disrupt the tracking, and I need ground, connection to planetary energy." Morgan scanned the navigational display. They were still a day from the Sarvan system, but the smaller Krell system was within reach. A gas giant with several moons, 1 marginally habitable. Avis, alter course for Krelfru. Maximum thrust. The old ox groaned as its engines strained against their limits. It was a research vessel, not built for speed or combat. The pursuing ship gained steadily. "They're charging weapons," Avis announced dispassionately. "Evasive maneuvers. Randomized pattern," Morgan ordered, strapping himself into the pilot's seat. He gestured for Ceridian to secure herself in the co-pilot's chair. The ship lurched violently as it began a series of unpredictable course changes. Morgan's stomach turned as artificial gravity struggled to compensate. A warning shot from the pursuing vessel streaked past their view screen, illuminating the bridge in harsh red light. "They do not wish to destroy us," Ceridian observed, remarkably calm despite the chaos. "Only to disable. The merchandise must not be damaged." Morgan shot her a grim smile. "Small comfort." "Communication attempt from pursuing vessel," Avis reported. "Put it through," Morgan said. Perhaps negotiation was possible. A harsh, filtered voice filled the bridge. "Attention, research vessel. You are transporting stolen property registered to the Blackreach Consortium. Power down and prepare for boarding, or we will disable your engines and extract our property by force." Morgan glanced at Ceridian, who shook her head minutely. "This is independent researcher Morgan Meyer," he responded. "I purchased all items aboard legally at Zyra Station auction. I have full documentation." "The female Solar was never authorized for sale," the voice replied. "She is registered salvage of the consortium. Final warning. Power down or be disabled." Morgan cut the communication. "Avis, how long to Krell 4 atmosphere?" 17 minutes at current velocity." "We won't make it," he muttered, watching the pursuer close the gap. Ceridian unstrapped herself from the co-pilot's chair and moved to stand directly behind Morgan. "I can buy us time," she said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "But you must trust me." Something in her tone made Morgan turn to look at her. In the dim emergency lighting of the bridge, her eyes seemed to glow with an inner luminescence. "What are you going to do?" "Remember," she said simply. "Open the communication channel again." Morgan hesitated only briefly before nodding to Avis. The channel opened with a static hiss. Ceridian straightened, drawing herself to full height despite her weakened condition. Then she began to speak, or rather, to sing, in that same flowing language Morgan had heard earlier. The words seemed to ripple through the ship, through space itself, carrying meaning beyond their syllables. On the view screen, the pursuing ship's trajectory faltered. "What's happening?" Morgan asked, not daring to take his eyes off the tactical display. "Solar voice," Ceridian explained between phrases of her strange recitation. "Our language carries power, disrupts certain neural patterns, especially in those who fear it." The pursuing ship had reduced speed dramatically, its course becoming erratic. Ceridian continued her otherworldly chant, the words building in intensity until Morgan felt them resonating in his own chest, though they caused him no discomfort. "Solar technology was not machines," she said during a pause, her voice strained with effort. "It was consciousness, language, energy. What your people called psychic." The chant resumed, louder now, and on the communication channel came sounds of confusion and alarm from the Blackreach vessel. Orders shouted, systems failing, crew members reporting hallucinations and disorientation. "Krell 4 atmosphere in 5 minutes, Avis announced. Ceridian's chant reached a crescendo, and the pursuing ship suddenly broke off its chase, veering sharply away, as if fleeing from some unseen horror. She collapsed then, the effort clearly having drained her limited reserves of strength. Morgan caught her before she hit the deck. "That was incredible," he said, helping her back to the co-pilot seat. She managed a weak smile. "Old knowledge, forbidden now. Why the Confederacy feared us." The old ox plunged into Krell 4's thick atmosphere, buffeted by fierce winds but shielded from pursuit by the moon's powerful magnetic field. Morgan navigated through swirling gas clouds until they reached the lower atmosphere, where breathable air existed in a narrow band around the moon's equator. He found a landing site in a sheltered valley, the ship's sensors indicating no settlements or technology within scanning range. As the landing struts settled into the rocky soil, Morgan felt tension drain from his body for the first time since leaving Zero Station. "We should be safe here for a while," he told Ceridian, who had recovered somewhat during their descent. "The magnetic storms will mask our presence, and this moon is outside normal trade routes." She nodded, looking through the view screen at the alien landscape, a world of sharp rock formations and sparse, tough vegetation under a perpetually twilight sky. "This place has power. I can feel it. It will help me heal." Over the next 3 days, Ceridian's recovery accelerated remarkably. Each morning, she ventured outside the ship to perform what appeared to be meditative exercises, often standing barefoot on the rocky ground for hours, eyes closed, palms open to the strange purple sky. Each evening, she returned stronger, her eyes brighter, her movements more fluid. Morgan observed with fascination, documenting everything in his research logs while respecting her privacy. On the 4th day, as they shared a simple meal in the ship's small galley, he finally asked the question that had been burning in his mind. "The solar civilization. What really happened to your people? The official records claim total eradication, but clearly..." Ceridian set down her cup of synthetic tea, considering her words carefully. "Not eradication, diaspora. When the Confederacy began the purges, our elders foresaw the end. They created sanctuaries, hidden worlds, secret enclaves, places where solar knowledge could be preserved. How many survived? I don't know the full count. Communication between sanctuaries was deemed too dangerous. My enclave housed perhaps 200 souls when I was taken." Her expression darkened at the memory. "We believed ourselves well hidden on a moon, much like this one. We were wrong." "And the technology, the abilities you demonstrated against the Blackreach ship?" Ceridian's fingers unconsciously traced the glyphs on her shoulder. "Not technology, as you understand it. Solar advancement followed a different path than the mechanical. We learned to manipulate energy through consciousness, through language precisely attuned to cosmic frequencies." Morgan leaned forward, scholar's excitement evident in his expression. "That's why the Confederacy feared you. Such abilities couldn't be replicated, couldn't be stolen, or mass-produced. Yes, they wanted our secrets. But our secrets weren't in machines they could disassemble. They were in minds and bodies and cultural practices cultivated over centuries." A shadow crossed her face. "So they tried to extract the knowledge through other means." Morgan's hand clenched involuntarily. "The people who hurt you were instruments of a system," she interrupted gently. "Individual cruelty serving institutional purpose. Just as your kindness does not redeem your civilization's crimes." The observation, delivered without accusation, nonetheless struck Morgan with its truth. He had spent his career documenting the remnants of cultures destroyed by the very society that had educated him, that had shaped him. How complicit was he, really, in the system he claimed to critique? "What will you do now?" he asked, changing the subject. "When you're fully recovered." Ceridian was silent for a long moment. "There is a place, a vault, one of many seeded throughout the galaxy before the purges. It contains what we call life seeds, genetic material, recorded knowledge, artifacts of solar culture. I am a keeper, trained to access such vaults. I must reach it, ensure its contents survive." "Where is this vault?" "Not far. The Sarvan system. I sensed it when you mentioned our course earlier." She studied his face. "You have been kind, Morgan Meyer. You have honored your word that I am not your property. I would understand if you wish to continue your own journey now. Morgan considered her words. His academic career had been devoted to preserving knowledge of lost cultures, piecing together fragments of destroyed civilizations. Now, before him, sat a living repository of one such culture, offering access to a complete, preserved record, a scholar's dream. But more than that, in the days since rescuing Ceridian, something had shifted in his understanding of his work. Cultural preservation wasn't just an academic exercise. It was about people, lives, futures. "I'll take you to Sarvan," he said finally, "if you'll allow me to record what I learn. Not to publish. Not until it's safe. But to preserve in my own archives. I would be honored to assist a keeper of solar knowledge." The smile that transformed Ceridian's face made her look, for the first time since Morgan had met her, her true age, young, vital, with the weight of centuries of knowledge behind her eyes. "The solar way is to share knowledge with those who respect it," she said. "You have earned that respect." They departed Krell 4 2 days later, when Ceridian deemed herself strong enough for the journey and the risk of pursuit had diminished. The old ox lumbered through space toward the Sarvan system, its ungainly bulk disguising the precious cargo it carried, not just a survivor of a supposedly extinct civilization, but the key to that civilization's renaissance. During the journey, Ceridian began teaching Morgan rudimentary solar language, explaining that certain concepts could only be fully understood through the language that had evolved to express them. Morgan proved an apt student, his linguist's ear quickly adapting to the flowing cadences and resonant tones. "Your name in solar would be Morganeth," she told him one evening as they sat on the observation deck, watching stars streak by. "It means seeker of lost light." Morgan found himself oddly moved by the gift of a name. "Is it accurate?" Ceridian tilted her head, considering. "I think so. You seek knowledge others have tried to extinguish. You preserve what would otherwise be lost to darkness." She paused. "Though perhaps you have been seeking without knowing what you hope to find." The observation struck uncomfortably close to truth. Morgan had spent 15 years collecting artifacts, documenting fragments, all in service of an abstract ideal of cultural preservation. But what was preservation without renewal, without living connection? "And your name?" he asked. "What does Ceridian mean in solar?" "One who carries the seed through winter," she replied. "A planter of future forests." The Sarvan system appeared on their scanners 3 days later, a yellow star orbited by 11 planets of various sizes. Ceridian directed them to Sarvan EX, the system's outermost world, a small, rocky planet with a thin atmosphere and extreme temperature variations between its day and night sides. "The vault is located in the twilight band," she explained as they approached, "where day meets night in perpetual balance." The old ox descended through wisps of atmospheric gases, scanners alert for any sign of settlement or technology. They found none. Sarvan X appeared untouched by human presence. Ceridian guided them to a landing site near a range of jagged mountains. As the ship settled onto the rocky surface, Morgan observed the stark beauty of the landscape. Dark stone formations silhouetted against a gradient sky that faded from deep purple to fiery orange, where the system's sun perpetually hovered at the horizon. "We walk from here," Ceridian said, donning a simple environmental suit Morgan had adapted for her from his supplies. "The vault will not reveal itself to technology." They set out across the rocky terrain, Ceridian moving with increasing confidence and strength. The environment suit's internal climate controls compensated for the planet's thin atmosphere and extreme temperature gradients, allowing them to traverse the twilight band comfortably. After several hours of walking, they reached a valley nestled between 2 towering peaks. Ceridian stopped, closing her eyes and extending her hands, palms down toward the ground. "Here," she whispered, "the heartbeat of my ancestors." Morgan's scanners detected nothing unusual about the location, But he had learned to trust Ceridian's perceptions. He watched as she knelt and began to sing in solar, her voice carrying strangely in the thin air, seeming to resonate with the rocks themselves. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like a deep exhalation, a section of stone at the valley's center shifted, revealing a descending stairway carved from the living rock. "The vault recognizes my voice, my genetic pattern," Ceridian explained, rising to her feet. "It has slept for many decades, waiting for a keeper to return." They descended the stairs, illumination springing to life as they proceeded. Not electric lighting, but some form of bioluminescence that grew brighter in their presence. The stairway led to a vast circular chamber, deep within the planet's crust. Its walls covered in the same glyphs Morgan had first noticed on Ceridian's skin. At the chamber's center stood a crystalline structure resembling a tree, its branches extending toward the ceiling, its roots disappearing into the floor. Within the translucent trunk, Morgan could see swirling patterns of light and color. "The life seed," Ceridian breathed, approaching the structure reverently. "All that remains of the central sanctuary's knowledge, preserved here for future generations." Morgan stayed back, recognizing the sacred nature of the moment. He watched as Ceridian placed both palms against the crystalline trunk and began to speak in solar, her voice taking on that resonant quality he had witnessed on the ship during their escape. The crystal responded, pulses of light synchronizing with her words, colors shifting through spectrums both familiar and alien. The chamber itself seemed to vibrate with energy, the glyphs on the walls illuminating one by one until the entire space was bathed in gentle radiance. "What's happening?" Morgan asked softly, when Ceridian finally stepped back from the crystal. "Renewal," she replied, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I have updated the life seed with all that has occurred since the purges began, and it has given me coordinates to other vaults, other keepers who might still live." She turned to face him fully. "Morgan, there are more survivors than I dared hope. The solar culture isn't just preserved, it can be reborn." The implications staggered him. "The Confederacy is not all-powerful, not all-seeing," she interrupted. "They believe us eradicated, and that belief is our shield. We can rebuild, quietly, in the shadow spaces between their stars, until we are strong enough to reclaim our place in the galaxy." Her expression softened. "And we will need allies, people like you, who value knowledge over power, diversity over dominance." Morgan found himself nodding. "My ship, my resources, they're yours to use in this cause. If you'll have me as an ally." Ceridian stepped closer, taking his hands in hers. "More than an ally, Morgan. The life seed recognized something in you, a resonance with solar frequencies that is rare in outsiders. With training, you could become a keeper yourself, a bridge between our cultures." The offer left Morgan momentarily speechless. All his life, he had studied dead civilizations, piecing together fragments of lost knowledge. Now he was being offered living integration with a culture he had thought extinct. A chance not just to preserve the past, but to help shape a future. "I would be honored," he said finally, meaning it more deeply than any words he'd ever spoken. Ceridian smiled, and in that expression, Morgan saw the person she might have been without the trauma she'd endured. Brilliant, determined, visionary. "Then let us begin the ritual of acknowledgement." She guided him to stand before the crystal tree and placed his palms against its smooth surface. The sensation was unlike anything Morgan had experienced, a vibration that seemed to resonate not just through his body, but through his consciousness, connecting him to something vast and ancient and alive. Ceridian began to speak in solar, teaching him phrases that he repeated, feeling each word reshape his understanding of reality. The crystal pulsed in harmony with their voices, images forming within its translucent structure, stars being born, civilizations rising and falling, knowledge flowing like rivers through the cosmos. How long they stood there, Morgan couldn't have said. Time seemed to lose meaning in the presence of the life seed, stretching and compressing according to laws beyond human comprehension. When at last they stepped back, he felt simultaneously exhausted and exhilarated, as if he had run a great distance only to discover new strength in his limbs. "You have been recognized," Ceridian told him, her voice rich with emotion. "You are now Morganeth, friend of Solar, preserver of light. The life seed will know you henceforth, as will all other seeds throughout the galaxy." Morgan looked at his hands, half expecting them to appear different somehow. They looked the same, yet he felt profoundly changed. "What happens now?" "Now we rest," she said simply. "And tomorrow, we begin the work of finding others, of building connections between the scattered seeds of solar civilization." She gestured toward a passage leading from the main chamber. "There are living quarters within the vault, designed to sustain keepers for extended periods. We can plan our next steps in safety." The living quarters proved to be simple but comfortable spaces carved from the same living rock as the main chamber, illuminated by the same gentle bioluminescence. Food and water were provided by systems Morgan couldn't begin to comprehend, though Ceridian explained they were based on principles of energy transformation rather than conventional agriculture. In the days that followed, they established a rhythm of work and study. Each morning, Ceridian continued Morgan's instruction in solar language and philosophy. Each afternoon, they consulted the life seed's vast knowledge repository, identifying potential locations of other survivors in vaults. Each evening, they planned their future journeys, mapping routes that would avoid Confederate attention. 2 weeks after their arrival at the vault, as they sat reviewing star charts projected by the life seed, Ceridian suddenly grew quiet, her expression distant. "What is it?" Morgan asked, having learned to recognize when she was perceiving something beyond ordinary senses. "A call," she said softly. "Another keeper has activated a life seed on the other side of the sector. She identifies herself as Vaya, Elder of the Third Voice." Joy illuminated Ceridian's features. "My mother's sister. I thought her lost in the initial purges." Morgan watched as Ceridian communicated through some method he couldn't perceive, her expressions shifting from surprise to relief to determination. When she finally returned her attention to him, her eyes shone with renewed purpose. "Vaya's enclave has preserved key elements of solar culture we thought lost forever," she explained. "Together with what this vault contains, we have the foundation for true renewal." She reached across the table to grasp Morgan's hand. "Our work begins in earnest now. Are you ready for what may be a lifetime's journey?" Morgan thought of the empty academic existence he'd led before finding Ceridian, the endless cataloging of fragments, the sterile debates with colleagues who saw only data where he sought meaning. He thought of the living knowledge pulsing through the crystal tree in the chamber beyond, of the worlds waiting to be rediscovered, of cultures demanding not just preservation, but renaissance. "More than ready," he replied, squeezing her hand. "Where do we begin?" Ceridian's smile contained all the promise of futures yet to be written. "We begin with a story. The story of how flies landed on a forgotten girl's skin while the galaxy looked away, until one human saw her true worth and paid the price of attention." She leaned forward, her voice taking on the resonant quality of solar formal speech. "And from that small beginning, light returned to darkened skies, and voices long silenced began again to sing. In the heart of the vault, the life seed pulsed in harmony with her words, sending ripples of energy through networks long dormant. Across the vast emptiness of space, other seeds awakened, responding to the signal, preparing for the solar renaissance that would begin, not with fire and vengeance, but with recognition and respect, the kinds of currency that, unlike Confederate credits, held value across the boundaries of species and time. Morgan and Ceridian worked through the night, planning their journey to Via's enclave. By morning, the old ox was prepped and ready, its systems augmented with subtle solar modifications that would shield it from Confederate detection. The life seed had been synchronized with their planned route, ensuring the knowledge it contained would remain accessible to them during their travels. As they stood at the entrance to the vault, preparing to seal it once more, Ceridian placed her hand on the rock wall, singing a brief solar phrase. "What does that mean?" Morgan asked. "It means, until the circle closes," she translated. "It's how we say, until we meet again, when speaking to places rather than people." The stairway sealed behind them as they ascended to the planet's surface, the rock reforming seamlessly, hiding all evidence of the treasure it protected. Above, the sky remained locked in eternal twilight, neither day nor night fully claiming dominion. A fitting metaphor, Morgan thought, for the work that lay ahead, balancing between concealment and revelation, between past preservation and future creation. Aboard the Old Ox, Morgan initiated launch sequences while Ceridian communicated final coordinates to the ship's navigation system. As the ungainly vessel lifted from Sarvan EX's surface, Morgan looked back at the valley where they had found the vault. From above, he could now see that the entire valley formed a massive solar glyph, visible only from orbit, a message to those who knew how to look, hidden in plain sight from those who saw only rocks and dust. "You were right," he told Ceridian as they broke atmosphere. "When you said the solar way is to share knowledge with those who respect it." She looked at him questioningly. "I spent my career collecting fragments of dead cultures, thinking I was preserving something precious," he explained. "But preservation without connection, without growth, is just another form of death. What you've shown me, what the life seed showed me, is that true cultural survival requires renewal, not just remembrance." Ceridian nodded, understanding in her eyes. "That is why the Confederacy failed to eradicate us, despite their power. They sought to destroy artifacts, documents, technologies, things they could see and touch. But culture lives in relationships, in language, in the spaces between people. It cannot be killed as long as someone remembers, as long as someone values the remembering." As the Old Ox set course for distant stars, Morgan reflected on the strange path that had led him from academic exile to this moment, partner in the rebirth of a civilization. He had gone to Zyra Station seeking artifacts and had found instead a living connection to all he valued. Ceridian had been seen as merchandise, valued only for what could be extracted from her, until someone recognized her true worth. "In solar philosophy," Ceridian said, as if reading his thoughts, "we have a concept called the price of attention. It means that what we truly value is revealed not by what we say, but by what we notice, what we pay attention to when no one is watching." Morgan thought of that moment in the auction hall, when flies had landed on Ceridian's skin and no one had made an offer. No one had paid attention except him. A small choice, an instinctive recognition of value where others saw only commodity. "Sometimes the smallest choices determine the course of galaxies," he observed. Ceridian smiled, reaching over to take his hand as stars streaked past the viewscreen. "And sometimes," she replied, "a single act of seeing someone's true worth can rewrite histories thought already finished." The Old Ox accelerated into the depths of space, carrying its precious cargo, not artifacts or specimens, but living knowledge and the seeds of renewal. Behind them, Sarvan X receded into distance, one vault among many, waiting for the circle to close. Ahead lay stars unnumbered, and the promise of voices, long silenced beginning, once more, to sing.